do that thing where I talk because I don't know if we're on air. Hey, we're on air. Hi, everyone. It's Kristi, and I am here with a star-studded hangout and a surprise guest. Do I deliver or do I not deliver? Come on, guys. So yeah, we got great people in the room. You know them already by name. You love them. We've got Chrisiousity. We've got Contrapoints. We've got Professor Philip Moriarty, or just Phil, really.
Stop with the professor. Yes, thank you.
You can call me Professor.
And me Dr. Yeah, and we're going to be basically having a moan about things, or at least figuring out how to set the world to rights in a way that we hope you guys find entertaining. So I'm not going to talk too much. I think we should just get into it. But maybe, do you want to talk a little bit? I think, Philip, you were one of the people who was sort of an impetus for this. So do you want to give a little background into your motivations and what you want to talk about tonight?
Yeah, so I think the initial contact came, Kristi, when you said that you wanted to do something in terms of social media and academia and academics, and obviously that's a subject very close to my heart, but I think it's broadened out since then. So I've many concerns. As somebody, I've been sort of heavily involved in the public engagement side. I've been involved with this channel, 60 Symbols. We've spent a lot of time trying to bring science to a wider audience, let's put it that way. And I've engaged a lot, but you know, there are many upsides of social media. There are many downsides, and I think we're all aware of the downsides. But more broadly than that, the thing that really concerns me is that, particularly in the US, there's a real growing and worrying skepticism about the value of universities, the value of education, the value of academics, to the extent where there's something like, you know, only 14% of those polled, I can't remember how big the poll was, but it was a number of thousands, sort of had any faith in universities, any faith in education. There's a death of expertise. And I've just finished reading a wonderful book by a guy called Tom Nichols called exactly that, The Death of Expertise. And, you know, it's always been there, but, you know, certain political events have obviously hastened it. So there's that. I want to talk a little bit, good, we could focus a little bit on that, this whole nonsensical marketplace of idea. But also the person I'd quite like to talk about as a really fascinating case study is Jordan Peterson. As an academic, and I'd say, you know, we talk about the impact of academics in the UK and elsewhere and how they connect on social media. Peterson's a wonderful example of somebody who really connects widely. I don't know what it is, something like $50,000 per month on Patreon. But there are many interesting aspects of Peterson that we can get to. I'll shut up now.
No worries. We're here to basically, you know, have a ramble and have a moan. So the next person I'm going to come to is Contrapoints. And also, Chrisiousity, you'll notice that I muted you just because your mic got knocked, and I'm obsessed with audio. So I'm trying to keep the audio clean. So if I mute you, it's just because I'm trying to let the person who speaks have the full range and not have background noise like that. Anyway, so Contrapoints, we've interacted on social media, but I've never been in a hangout with you before. So nice to meet you face to face. I'm really excited.
Yes, hello. Nice to finally talk to you all too.
Yeah, and for the audience, would you want to just say a few words about what your interest in this topic is and your perspective on it as well?
Well, my interest in academia, I mean, I used to be in academia, at least as far as going about halfway through a PhD program before bailing. And I kind of come from a position of, I was very frustrated with academia for a while, so I have some sympathies with people who are hostile to it, because I sort of understand why they might feel that way, in the sense that they may feel that academics don't really speak to them. And I think it's true that academics are pretty bad at it. Now, I'm not that I'm suggesting that, like, oh, it's the left's fault that Trump won or anything. I'm not making that kind of argument. But recently, especially as I've been out of academia further, my hostilities for it has kind of simmered and declined. And I now kind of feel a little bit maybe more nostalgic for it, that I'm stuck in the alternative, which is the glorious free marketplace of ideas that we all know so well. And yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that, I don't know, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I would like to see more people who are in academia sort of take notice of the things that are happening outside, things that are happening with these new media. I remember about a year ago, it was right around, or less than a year ago, it was like right around the time of Trump's election, I went back to the department that I'd been with just to visit some friends who were still grad students, and we were sitting around at a bar, and I started talking about the alt-right, and no one had really heard of the alt-right. These are people who like are getting PhDs, some of them in political philosophy, and they like never heard. I was sitting there like explaining the word cuck to them. They'd never heard the word cuck, and like I just thought it was interesting that people who are experts in politics would not be in tune to this with this kind of thing.
So it's very interesting, and there is an aspect of the bubble. It was interesting when a certain big YouTuber. I want to try and steer this more away, if at all possible. Instead of singling out individuals, apart from Peterson, who I'm going to have some good things to say as well as some bad things, but it would be good to just try and focus on the concepts and the issues rather than the people. But a certain big YouTuber, when he was on Joe Rogan's show recently, it was very interesting how Rogan was saying, look, you're living in a bubble. Look at a social media for academics conference here at Nottingham a couple of months back, and was talking about just how toxic the environment can get. And these were academics involved in social media who know about social media. And I said, right, how many of you are familiar with Anita Sarkeesian? Are you many familiar with her videos or things? 4 hands in the audience went up. 4 hands. That's Sarkeesian. So you can imagine the sort of lower lying levels. Yeah, so I agree entirely. And academics, I think it's difficult sometimes for us to get involved, particularly as the toxicity increases.
Yeah, I definitely sympathize with that. Like, I mean, if you're used to like respectful dialogue with people who respond to your ideas instead of your makeup or whatever, like it's like to suddenly plunge yourself into this world where like there's just no rules, and like how you look is at least as important as how good your arguments are, and like just they're willing to like harass your family, and it's just like, why would you want to go into that from academia? So I get why people don't want to do it, but at the same time, we have to, yeah.
Before we get, sorry, I'm going to also say, before we get in there, jump in, because we have our special guest, Chrisiousity, who I'm unmuting now. And before we get going too deeply, I just want to bring her into the conversation because I hadn't introduced her yet. So yeah, special guest Chrisiousity, you're here to join the conversation and your perspective on this.
Well, I guess I come as the not academic at all person. I went to community college for a little while, a couple years. So that's about as far as I ever got. I always really liked to read. And I got a textbook on critical thinking. I remember reading through it 2 or 3 times, doing all the exercises just by myself, because it was, for me, it was a light bulb sort of moment. When they talk about the marketplace of ideas, that's all fine, but there's nobody teaching people how to be good consumers there. So, that's why you just sort of get whatever you're going to get, and it's, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it seems pretty obvious to me that the marketplace never seems to come up with just magically the best ideas the way that they seem to assume it will.
That sounds like a great segue for the question, for the first wording that I've got here, which is, and I'll throw it back open, why the marketplace of ideas is a terrible way to determine truth claims, because it's basically an ad pop fallacy dressed up in capitalist terms. Discuss.
Yes.
In a very academic way.
The interesting thing about it, of course, is that it assumes that it's actually like the flaws in conventional economics. It assumes that everybody is a rational decision maker. It assumes that everybody makes those decisions in terms of the quality of an idea purely on the basis of a rational approach. We all are biased. At some level, we all are biased. And as Contra just said, particularly in some cases, it's more what you look like. And it's a question of style over substance. It's interesting, we had a credit crunch in terms of, we had a free market, we had a lack of regulation, we had a credit problem. That's much the same with the marketplace of ideas. It's, you've you can draw the parallels between the economics and the ideas, and they're both very badly flawed.
Yeah, I think it actually. Oh, sorry.
No. You go ahead, Contra,
Okay.
and then I'll come up and then your point.
Yeah, I think it's actually worse than the economic assumption, because the economic assumption is that people will behave according to rational self-interest, which assumes that they'll always do what's best for them. But with the free marketplace of ideas, like, even if they do what's best for them, that still might not be good. Like, because that's believing what's good for me, like believing what makes me feel good, for instance, could be something completely false. In fact, it usually is completely false when it comes to, for instance, people in a privileged group. It's better for you to think that everything's fine. Like, I don't have to care about minorities. I don't have to care about, that's good for your well-being, because you don't have to worry about your privilege. You can just rest assured that actually the Black Lives Matter is just a bunch of unreasonable whiners, and trans people are delusional maniacs, and so on and so on and so on. And you don't have to actually change anything. That's great for you, but is it true? No.
Of course not.
Yeah, it's like a second layer where the free marketplace idea sort of is not the idea we want to have.
Yeah, and actually, that's a perfect segue to the thing I wanted to bring up, which is there's actually a theory called rational choice theory that we use in political science as well as as was developed in economics. It says you can predict somebody's economic behavior if you know the probability of the benefits that they're looking for, whether it's a refreshing drink or some sort of detergent that's not going to harm the environment, and then all of the costs associated with that. And if the benefits outweigh the costs, then people are going to go in that direction. So you can help, for instance, the example I always use in class was if you've got two people who are buying dishwashing liquid or washing up liquid, if you want to call it for the UK. One is a person who's a student who's also has to buy beer for a party. And the other one is a sort of guardian reading, more economically conscious mom. Well, for the utility for the student is to buy the cheapest product because it saves them money. Whereas for someone who's more sensitive to the environment, they're willing to pay the cost to try to offset their impact on the environment. So you can understand economic behavior systematically, and you can use theories to predict it. So that's one thing that happens in economics that doesn't happen with ideologies or concepts. The other thing that, sorry, I'll just go one more point, then I'll take it over to you, Phil, is that when people try to compare the marketplace of ideas to the scientific method, there is a screening process in the scientific method. There is a way to filter out bad ideas, and there is a way to catch bad ideas if they do get out. Because you can't replicate a study that was faked. You can't, because it was faked. It's not real. So, there are quality control steps in the scientific process.
Principle.
There's none. Yeah, yes. It's set up to have quality control.
Yeah.
How about that,
Yeah.
right? Unless you get the predatory publishers who just publish crap because they can. But yeah, there's no such filter in the marketplace.
And it's weird that the people who venerate the free marketplace of ideas, they tend to also venerate science, but science is like not a free market model of ideas at all.
There's a two-word rejection of the marketplace of ideas, a two-word rejection, Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
Right? 3.15 million followers, loads of people hanging off his every word. When Oprah Winfrey used to have a show, he was on every other week? Pure bollocks. Sorry to be so blunt, but the ideas are absolutely groundless. It's an absolute mockery of, he takes ideas from quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and just, there's no substance there. Interesting with Chopra, I want to be fair to Chopra, I honestly don't think he's a charlatan. I don't think he's a snake oil salesman. Having watched him and having listened to him and having read to him, Christ, that was painful. Did I say read to him? I mean, read to him. Read into Chopra, now that would be bad. But, I honestly think he believes this guff. And therefore, because he believes it, he can be very persuasive. When you look at what he's saying, he's got all the right words in terms of energy and information and quantum connections, etc. It's just that they're not necessarily in the right order, or that they're not necessarily connected in the right ways. And it's a word salad, but it sounds sciencey. And, the idea that there's, the best ideas go to the top, I'll say it again, Chopra. That's your counter argument. You're finished there. He's incredibly popular.
There are so many problems with humans. Our little monkey minds are so wonky. They're just terrible. we will screw ourselves up 20 ways till Sunday with bias, with, motivated reasoning, with, all these different things, or just assuming that our intuitions have some basis in anything, as opposed to just being, what we've sort of figured out, like what Einstein called the collection of biases you get by the time you're 18, and that's common sense. So, and the other problem is that there are some ideas that work in opposition. So you just reminded me with Deepak Chopra, because when I was young, I was into like New Age, I was into Wicca, all that sort of woo stuff. I didn't grow up in a religious household, so I think that was part of my figuring out the world. And, there's a lot of things like you can't be all logical. You have to let go of your rational thought and your rational mind in order to grow spiritually. And there's almost a shaming of looking at things skeptically and going, I told people, there was the one moment as I was reading a book and somebody actually said that they could, through magic, bend time if they were late to an appointment so that they could get to their appointment faster. And wow. In their car, they would magically bend time. And I just closed the book, put it down, and said, I have to find new things to do.
Well, there's something. Have you heard of The Secret? Capital T, capital S.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like the ultimate wishful thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, the argument was it was rooted in quantum physics. And the disturbing thing, I do something called a Skeptics in the Pub event. Kristi turned up unexpectedly at one in Bristol. I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh wow.
The look on your face. You were like, what are you doing here?
Hang on, it's the cognitive dissonance of training. That doesn't work. But the interesting thing is that, and it comes back to what you were saying, Contra, about academics and connecting with the wider public. And in terms of the language, we can dismissively go, well, the secret, the argument is that the secret is that because you're interconnected with the universe, quantum physics says that you can influence the universe, and if you think good thoughts, good things will come to you. That's effectively it in a nutshell. And you look at that and you think, well, that's just, scientists can sniff and sneer, but in fact, we're responsible. At some level, we're responsible. You go back and you'll find in popular science articles, you'll find in papers, this whole connection between consciousness and quantum physics. And scientists have just not been careful enough. And you can't then blame somebody who doesn't have a background in physics or background in science for taking those words at face value. It's extremely difficult to draw that balance between oversimplifying something but also not losing the rigor, not losing the actual essence or the kernel of the idea. And I think, Contra, that's why many academics steer clear of that. Because, for example, that Skeptics in the Pub thing, I got asked much more difficult questions and that, much more challenging than I've ever got asked at an international conference. I think you've probably, as a PhD student, went to some international conferences. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
Some piece of minutiae that nobody, apart from 3 people in the world, give a toss about. And then, whereas if you're in a pub, it's, why the hell are you doing this? What's the point? Why should I care?
Yeah.
So the latter is much more challenging.
Yeah, I also think that when it comes to engaging with ideas, like for instance, Deepak Chopra, you're sort of at the science version would be Deepak Chopra. It's difficult to publicly go about debunking this kind of thing without seeming like you are an elitist, a nerd, a just kind of stuffy buzzkill, right? And so, okay, it's one thing when it's in physics, but then we have the same problem with like the social sciences or humanities, where it's hard to talk about something like systemic racism or something in response to a kind of Trumpian figure or a Trump follower who has this like very populist rhetoric about race, and then to be like trying to introduce all these, like, to say like, okay, yes, like the demographic crime rate might be here, but let's examine like the sociological and the economic reasons why it's like that. And it's like, yeah, whatever, nerd. Like, so, you know, like one person's saying a simple, easy to feel and understand thing, and the other person is saying all these big words and all this confusing, you know, distinctions. And it's like, you could end up looking the worse for even trying.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's Trump all over again, isn't it? I mean, that was the thing that, you know, for people who didn't have a, you know, who didn't care about the sophisticated nuance of foreign policy, having him just speak in very plain language, saying, you know, ISIS are animals and we're going to kill them all and we're going to win.
Yeah,
Like,
it appeals here, doesn't it?
Yeah. Whereas, you know, in defense of academia, because I know we're kind of bashing on it. Obviously, it's a very valuable institution that we all love, but, you know, it drives us crazy as well. But, you know, it's like with any profession, if you want to do it for a living, you have to be good at it. And being good at it means knowing the right things, right? So when you go through the university process and the master's and the PhD, you're removing yourself from the world. I'm sorry, but you are. You're basically going back and you're reading and thinking about all the ideas that have come before you, so that you can find a little gap of bits that we don't know yet, so that you can make an original contribution. Yeah. And so the world you live in ends up being the theories that you've read about in order to get to the point where you can identify the gap and address it. And, you know, especially like as a political scientist, I have to say, you know, when we look at public engaging with, or in terms of the public, we look at mass public opinion polls. You know, we don't look at how individual people, I mean, that's the whole point of the qualitative election study of Britain, is to really try to get down to voters and listen to them rather than hand them a predetermined survey and say, where do you fit in the boxes I've set up for you? But, you know, in terms of, you know, Contra's point about people being disconnected from the actual politics, yeah, political science is, you know, it is, one would think that if you study politics, you're going to be very up on what's going on. But, you know, that's what I thought too. But as I went farther and farther along, you get farther and farther away from the thing that you're really, that kind of you thought it was supposed to be in the beginning. I mean, I found it useful, and it's, you know, using the scientific method to understand, or to applying scientific principles and the scientific method to the social world. I don't know that there is any better way to come up with producing knowledge. There just isn't. We need the scientific method, and we need scientific principles. But at the same time, you then become caught up in a world with specialist language and norms and understandings and information that's been handed down, and conventional wisdoms and things that you just know from reading 20 studies are the case. They're just true. But all of that makes a distance between you and someone who hasn't gone through that process. And I think that's why academics, you know, they are criticized, rightly so, for not being able to speak public. But I think we're never taught how to translate what's in our heads. It's you know, the thing about unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. You don't know what you don't know, then you do know what you don't know, then you try to get better at what you're doing, and then eventually you don't realize you're doing it anymore. So you start out, it's like playing guitar. It's like somebody who's been playing guitar for 20 years doesn't remember what it's like to not be able to do an F bar, you know, to struggle with bar chords. Yeah. And it's the same with academics. We forget what it's like to not be who we are.
Yeah. You know, So if you're teaching someone for 20 years, you, as you say, Kristi, you forget just what it was like, which is why there's a major focus. There's a guy called Eric Mazur in Harvard has looked at this from a physics perspective, but there's lots of others there, where you flip the classroom. So you ask questions, and then you say to the students, convince the person beside you, or convince the group that you're in that you're right, on the basis that if they are right, they'll do a good job of explaining it. If they're wrong, they'll just bullshit and they won't be convincing. But it's exactly that. Then the students are hearing from somebody who's got the same level of experience as they have. The problem with that, however, is academics sort of jump on this and yeah, we'll do that, and we go through the various trends. I spoke to some students, second-year students in the lab. When you're demonstrating in the lab, it's a great way to just start chatting to students. And they basically said, I agree, look, I paid £9,000 a year for you to teach me. Not him, not her, you. And that's, you know, that's interesting, because there's also that sort of expertise aspect of it as well. So Yeah.
Well, maybe
So
we can
it's-
use
it's
this
fun.
as a springboard to go into the second question, because we're only in the second question. But it's basically this rise of pride and ignorance, or the rejection of sophisticated understandings as being elitist. We talked a little bit about Peter, I think, Peter Coffin has a great video, by the way, on the free market of ideas people can check out. But also this sort of growing hostility by people on the right, and especially Republicans in the United States being openly hostile to the notion of universities and experts. And for people who don't live in the UK, I don't know, Philip, if you want to talk about why people don't need experts anymore and where that phrase came from relative to what debate and I don't, you know the whole, yeah, I'm sure, the whole Brexit thing?
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, of course. And Gove's argue. Yeah. Yes, indeed. So Michael Gove, one of our wonderfully loved politicians, during the Brexit debate basically said, yeah, we've heard more than enough from experts on in terms of the arguments with regard to the sort of economic benefits and disadvantages left back and forth in terms of Brexit. That's problematic, obviously, particularly for somebody who used to be Minister of State for Education, to say that we've heard more than enough from experts. But it's again what Contra was saying. It was, and again, if you look at it from the point of view of, you know, what you're saying in terms of Trump, etc., that politically is actually a very good thing to say. It's a very clever thing to say, because I'm on your side. I'm not one of them. I'm not the elite. I'm with you. And you can see how that can connect. And it's extremely problematic, because you're denigrating knowledge, you're denigrating expertise. You know, I've heard in a number of occasions, and particularly when I used to get involved in interminable bloody debates on Twitter and on blog posts and just comment sections for no reason at all, you'd hear, well, we've got Google now. You know, particularly with social sciences, they're not real sciences. I can do what the social sciences do. I just need Google. And, you know, knowledge has been democratized, etc. And that's a problem. That's a major problem, because it's not just the knowledge base in terms of learning and in terms of at any level. It's the engaging with the material. So how we counter that, I don't know, but I do know this, that the standard academic mantra is what we need is education, education, education is nonsense. That's not, you know, that's not what's going to change it. In fact, in many ways, maybe it's time for academics to shut up, because who's going to convince somebody who's incredibly anti-climate change? Is it going to be a leftist academic that's seen as an SJW? Or is it going to be somebody who's rather closer, maybe more right of center, but perhaps a little bit more moderate? Do we do this in stages? Because I honestly
Arnold
think
Schwarzenegger, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there's a massive drive right across the world, but certainly in the UK, for academics to get out there and do public engagement. That's, you know, that's right, because we're publicly funded. But in fact, you know, there are some Nobel laureates out there, and again, coming back to your extremely good point, Contra, there are some Nobel laureates out there, and the last thing you'd want to do is put them in front of, you know, for example, a class of school children. They put them off science for life.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've noticed, and I've heard other people report this too, is that there's almost a correlation between someone's being a famous and a successful researcher and being a bad teacher and explainer, because the two skills are very different. So, like, one of the problems, I guess, is also that the university doesn't do much to incentivize, I mean, teaching at all as ability, but also, you know, much less speaking to the general public. So, you know, all that determines whether you get your PhD, whether you get a prestigious position, whether you get tenure. So much of it is just how good is your research, how many publications do you have. It's not whether you are good at teaching your students.
I agree, but fortunately in the UK, the only good thing about the £9,000 fees, the only good thing is that it's finally convinced universities, hang on, the entire financial health of the university depends on those students. If we don't teach those students correctly, we're going to lose income. And so there is, it's still the case, you're absolutely right, Contra, there's still the case that the overriding, or certainly dominant, maybe overriding is too far, but dominant criterion is the research outputs. But now teaching is starting to play a bigger role, certainly in promotions. If you get year on year very poor returns on questionnaires from students, your promotion will be affected in UK universities at least.
Well, in the US, they have these surveys that these actually somewhat do matter. These student surveys at the end of each course that all the students fill out and rate the professor, and that turns out to matter somewhat. But the problem with that is that professors respond to it by giving out easy A's. And like, so then you just have massive grade inflation, and like, it's again not really incentivizing how well is information really being conveyed.
I'm really glad you brought up money, because I don't think that the problem of the expense of college is talked about enough, and how much that's contributing. I mean, because it's so expensive, and it especially in the United States, it just cuts so many people right off. You know, if you can't take a few years off, if you don't have a position where you can go in and you have parents who can maybe help you, then you're screwed. You're not going to go it. And that sort of anger and frustration that you feel, or that, you know, like I felt when I couldn't go on right away to college and had to struggle through getting a couple of classes here, a couple classes there, and not really getting anywhere. But then you see these people who are getting through, and it's just based on class. So there's this sort of class consciousness thing that happens that isn't talked about, you know. And I've got to assume that for the people who do get in and who are spending $10,000, $12,000 a year minimum for their education, you know, it's more like 20, 25 now in a lot of places. That, you know, people talk about, oh, I can't believe this woman wanted a safe space or a homey feel. I wonder why she doesn't want a mint on her pillow in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, for that money.
Well, and increasingly people do want mints on their pillows. I mean, they have those, the way the funding works with a lot of, at least like big private universities anyway, they run them like country clubs with Olympic swimming pools, and like, you know, it's not really a great use of money in my opinion. But also the tuition is so outrageous that students are not completely unreasonable to demand it. I mean, they're spending $250,000, and so yeah, they want the university to be run for them, understandably. I mean, you feel this when you're teaching kids too. Like, they feel entitled to good grades, and they feel, you know, and why shouldn't they? Look how much, I mean, this is like, it's being run like a business, so that's how they're gonna end up feeling, like customers.
Right.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Oh, sorry, Kristi, do you wanna?
I was just going to say that, you know, if buying books that taught me German made me proficient, I would be at a university level of German right now, because I have so many books that I've bought to help me learn German. But it doesn't matter that if I buy them, it matters if I read them. And this is, you know, the thing about, you know, I felt in the UK in particular that it was almost impossible at the institutions I was at to fail a class. And I don't think failing is a bad thing. You know, we do experiments in science and they don't work out, and we learn something from them. And sometimes
I'm gonna stick up for the students here. The pressure is on them is intense. At least in my experience in Nottingham, and the experience of and I can only speak about physics in Nottingham. Though I haven't said that, I've been external examiner for other departments. But students are intensely focused. They know what the competition is like. They know how difficult it is. Stress levels and mental health issues are rising dramatically. Now, you could argue that maybe we're just picking up on those. It's the age-old problem of, is it just because we're recording them better, is there actually a rise? But there's huge, particularly in other sort of well-known universities further south of here, the pressure and is intense on some of these students.
So I'm just saying, I'm thinking more from a structural level. From a structural level where it was not clear to me if a student failed my class, how they would be able to retake it and continue in their degree scheme.
That's clear, certainly in terms of what we do, at least. It's absolutely clear, and they can compensate for certain modules. Is there grade inflation? Yeah, there's a bit of grade. But the way I look at it is this: I've been doing this for 20 years. Jesus, I've been doing it for 20 years. And if I look at the PhD students that are in the group now, compared to where they were 20 years ago, do I see a net loss? Do I see that they're sort of less proficient? No, if anything, they're better. But certainly no, you know, they're extremely good. Moreover, I did an experiment with my first year tutees in the run up to exams this year, and I dug out a paper from 2000, first year paper, and slapped it down in front of them and said, right, okay, let's look at this and let's do it. They did a fantastic job. So this, you know, I've got a colleague in Dublin City University, which is where I did my first degree and PhD, who's on does a part of a physics education group, and he starts off the abstract for his talk is, it starts off with the line, it's been well known for the last 250 years that the quality of first year students has been decaying rapidly. So, you know, it's a question of it's been ever thus, but I don't see it. And in terms of the feedback as well, I get extremely good, as do my colleagues. Sure, you get the, you know, the occasional, there should be more beer in lectures or whatever, but the rest, which, you know, to be fair, they're probably making a reasonable point there. But, you know, it's constructive feedback, it's helpful feedback, and it's mature feedback, even from first years.
Can I ask, do your first year students, do their marks count to their overall graduation?
No, they don't.
And this is just,
they don't.
So yeah, this is like, it was a weird concept to me, that you could do an entire year at university and it now not count. As long as you pass with a 40, you can go on to your
The reason, the underlying motivation for that and the rationale for that is that we're taking them from A level, where you'd like to think there's some degree of independent learning, but there isn't really. To take them from that and to dump them in and say, right, now off you go, you do this stuff yourself, you understand it, is, you know, there has to be an adjustment period. Therefore, to mark them directly on what's happening in that first year is a bit of an issue. That's the rationale. I agree, there are downsides, because sometimes what you really want to push a student is, look, this is going to count. Even at the 10% level, this is going to count to your degree. And I think some of them sort of take their foot off the accelerator a little bit, because they know it's a qualifying year. And they say, okay, well, if I just get a pass this year, it'll be fine. But the problem is there's a direct correlation between, obviously, the marks they get in first year.
Yeah, and if you miss out that first year as a base building, that's all your core courses that all your second and third year is going to be based on. So if you blow off your seminars because it doesn't count, and you get by with a 41 on your final exam, like you said, you're setting yourself up for failure. But we're kind of getting off into the, I was
yeah, no, it's an interesting, but just on that failure point, but having said that, and again, coming back to something you said, that failure might be, I failed my third year, dramatically failed my third year. I was more focused on playing guitar and being in a band, and didn't even turn up for some exams, failed it dramatically. If I hadn't have failed my exams, I would not have done a PhD, because it was the kick in the arse I needed to get to the sort of 2-1 level to actually do a PhD.
Yeah. Can I just interject, because I wanted to just clarify that I'm not criticizing the students. I'm criticizing the college system that we have.
I appreciate that.
Way too much for money. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, and they're even predatory to their own students in many ways. You know, they're, especially if their students are good at sports, they're going to sign them up and just, you know, get money out of them. And in America, those students are going to be there, you know, putting their bodies on the line free for nothing, so that, you know, the colleges can rake in money. And if they get injured, they're screwed. If they don't make it to the majors, they're screwed. So like, I really feel that there's because of just the sheer amount of money, there's no way to keep it from being predatory. And I think the students are dealing with it as best as they can, you know, but that's the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think that, I mean, your point about the money thing being important in terms of the elitism thing, yeah, I totally agree that it should not be downplayed, because to some extent, people's feeling that it is that at least having a university education is elitist is absolutely correct. It is elitist. I mean, one of my parents is a professor at a university, and so I got a tuition break because of that. That's basically why I have an education, like, because of nepotism. And like, other people I know, either they can't afford it, so they didn't do it, or they have incredible debt that they're struggling to pay off. So it's like, yeah, I can see why that some people might kind of resent this system when it is kind of a classist, elitist system. And does that pertain to the knowledge that comes out of it? Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But there's like a somewhat real economic foundation there for the elitism accusation, I would think.
Yeah, well, Oxford and Cambridge face this all the time, and again, to be fair to them, they do make efforts, but you know, it's embedded in the system for centuries. So yeah.
Well, and then there are, you know, situations like in the UK. I don't know if you heard about this. Ted Charest did a video on this too. You know, a guy, he comes out of the university. He's a student. He goes up to, he's a little drunk, so he goes up to a homeless man and says, "You want some change?" The homeless man says yes. So he takes out a 20-pound, lights it on fire, and says, "Look, I just changed it to fire."
Yeah,
you
no,
know, I mean, so like, and I had, like I said, some experiences like that too, of just seeing people who were university students who were such snobs or such just awful, that, you know, they treated you like dirt because
there are certainly some, but I think we need to steer clear of just tarring all, you know, of Oxbridge with the same brush. I know lots and lots of students, including students who come through the comprehensive system, including state-educated students who are not coming from very high backgrounds. And you know, those universities, it's nice to sort of just play into that stereotype, I guess, and say that they are elite, and, you know, the streaming ivory towers and the dreaming spires, etc., etc. But to be fair to them, and I don't tend to be fair to Oxford and Cambridge that often, but to be fair to them, they do put a lot of effort into sort of widening participation to try and bring those students in. The problem is if the perception of the place, so for example, for me, I deliberately didn't go to Trinity College in Dublin, which is a very elite university. I went to, for me, which was a much better university, a smaller university at the time, Dublin City University. It's extremely good university, but I deliberately didn't go because of my perception of what Trinity was. So the universities, you know, and if that's embedded, if that's a perception that's built over centuries, they're not going to change that in a few decades. So I take your points on board. There is certainly, you know, that guy who burnt the money in front, it's apparently in some societies an initiation ritual. That's just scummy. You know, there's no two ways, but that's not representative. It's not representative of all students, of course, at Oxford.
Well, I wouldn't think it would be, but the fact that there's enough of those people out there helps to create this sort of sense in people. It did in me when I was younger, and I am not anti-academia at all. I'm not. I think it's wonderful. I just think it should be open to more people, and I don't think that cost should be the kind of barrier that it is. You know, if it was easier to get in, then I don't think you would have this sort of class stratification, and you wouldn't have this bitterness so much. And, you know, I from working class all the time, you know, from just being in working class people have no interest in these highfalutin ivory tower types. They think they're assholes, you know, and it may not be fair, but you can see where it comes from.
I would say also, based on my research, qualitative research on multiple elections now, at least in, you know, in the UK, one of the problems that your lay person who isn't an expert on like Brexit, the frustrations that they have in terms of a distrust of elites is, and just go back to like the problem of eggs, you know, a headline, eggs are going to kill you. 2 years later, eggs are great for you. 2 years after that, eggs are going to kill you again. And because, you know, the problem with communicating science to the public, it seems like in the headlines, experts who are supposed to know things don't actually know what they're talking about because they keep changing their minds. Or this is another example given during the Brexit debate. You know, they would have BBC Radio 4, you'd bring on two experts, and they're both experts in the same field, and they come to completely different conclusions. Now, as people inside academia and people who are familiar with academic debates, that's par for the course. But if you're coming in it from the outside, if you're trying to look for information on par with, like, you know, reading how many calories a tin of food has, or the church telling you that, you know, what is good and what is bad, and this is right and wrong, and there are absolute truths, and you don't have to think too much about it, just accept it, to then be thrown, you know, two different economic theories that have different implications, they can't weigh between those. They don't know who's right or if they're both wrong. And so it ends up being a sort of a rejection. This is a way that I see also with non-voters who talk about political parties. Oh, they don't talk about things that are important to me. They don't try to get me involved. Well, the fact is that the parties are trying to do that, but you're not involved. But you don't want to say, because maybe you feel bad, I'm too lazy to care about politics. So you blame other people for what you're not doing. And it's the same kind of thing. If you just tune out of experts because they disagree, it might not be because it's your fault. You might just not have a degree in economics, so you don't know who's telling the truth. But I think all of this it's very postmodern. It's the breakdown
we'll get to that
of
soon.
questioning, the questioning of grand narratives and things. But yeah, I think the fact that in some ways we have so much information, we're putting out so many results that we're actually appearing to be less certain for people who don't know that science is mostly about uncertainty.
Yeah, no, that is the key thing, and we need to. My teeth are set up on edge a little bit every time I hear science proves this or this was scientifically proven or whatever, because that's a level of certainty. We discussed this before, Kristi, in the last hangout, in terms of how you term papers, how you the language you write them in. It's very provisional. It's the best evidence we've got is that this is the case, because we know that there isn't, there may well be a paper coming along 10 years down the line. And I think if we're going to change perception of science, that's maybe one thing we should try to do. Instead of it going, science tells us this, therefore it's definitive and absolute, we need to try and build in, look, science is our best guesses at the moment. And some of them are going to be right for some time, and some of them might just fall by the wayside. But that's not how science is presented. And it's something that's built up the public perception over decades. It's going to be difficult to shake it off.
Yeah. Anyone want to come in on that? Contrapoints?
I think that, well, when it comes to people feeling like the academics are not representing them or things that they care about, I mean, when the US, so yeah, there's when it comes to science, there's this confusion about like, oh, the debate about global climate change is science is too complicated. Like, why I'd rather just listen to someone who's just going to tell it straight. By straight, I mean simple. But I think when it comes to the more sociological or moral and political stuff, there's also this. I mean, in America, there's this heavy racial aspect to it, where the sociologists and also the Democratic politicians are always going on about the poverty of Black urban areas and the oppression of women and minorities and immigrants. And to a lot of like white middle Americans, this seems like this elitist conspiracy to help everyone but me, right? There's this, they've sort of colluded with like the Black people and the feminists and the homosexuals have all kind of colluded to help each other out and give each other welfare, where I'm left behind struggling. That's the sense that people seem to have. And part of it has to do with, I mean, I don't know what the answer to that problem is, because it's true that the people who are in those like Rust Belt states, that the ones that were the topic of so many think pieces after Trump won, it's true that they are disadvantaged in a lot of ways. So the question is how to address that and appeal to those people in a way that doesn't mean also abandoning all of our other causes.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is probably not, how do we fix this? The answer is not more academics.
Yeah, I agree.
Which runs against the sort of public engagement aspects. And, a lot of our funding is predicated on increasing that level of public engagement because, the argument there is we get filmed by the taxpayer, therefore we should get out there. We could be doing more damage than good in some cases.
Yeah, there needs to be like a spokesperson who can really talk that the right. I mean, in a way, Bernie Sanders was sort of good at it. Like he was an angry mostly white guy, and that's there were people who were just looking for an angry white guy, which is I think explains the people who switched from Sanders to Trump. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I agree that it can't be a professor, and it can't be me either. Because I'm too visibly at this point. I'm so part of the conspiracy.
Well, should we bring that? Does this bring us on to, as I have in the comments, and sorry, language warning, Jordan fucking Peterson.
Okay, yeah.
As being someone who could speak. Is this going to be a Moriarty rant? Because if so, I'm going to like.
It's not going to be. It's actually. I'm going to try and do this. I've got a friend here and colleague who's been talking about Jordan Peterson for quite some time. He's not, his politics are not particularly right of centre, etc. But he said that Peterson is somebody, you know, he's quite eloquent, true. He's quite charismatic, true. And he's bright. He's intelligent. He's clearly intelligent. He's what I find absolute, and I don't want to get into mudslinging, and I really don't want to get in. But what I find amazing about Peterson is that he rails against postmodernism all the time. I don't know how many videos are out there in terms of Peterson railing against postmodernism. Yet when you listen to what he's saying, it's as postmodern as it gets. It is remarkable. Beyond that, it's actually, I've complained about Chauffeur's language. If you listen to what Peterson is saying and break it down, and I wrote it down, I just to sort of take that eloquence and take the style over substance and look at the substance of what he's saying. It's remarkable. So on the postmodern side, I know there's been a lot of debate about postmodernism recently. For me, it's just harking back to, are you familiar with Alan Sokal? Anybody familiar with Alan Sokal? So, you know, the science wars in the 90s. I'm a physicist. I have a lot of time for what Sokal said about postmodernism. An awful lot of it is obscure and deliberately obscure, written in deliberately and willfully impenetrable language, because it's a real case of style over substance again. The idea of a lack of objectivity and everything is just, you can have your own particular view or your own particular subjective reality is something that doesn't sit well, whatever about quantum mechanics and the information is there, but it doesn't sit well with physicists. And, you know, the great quote from Sokal, which I've got written down here, in terms of when he wrote that, I suppose, guess for the audience I should mention. So Alan Sokal was a physicist who wrote a very famous spoof article called Transgressing the Limitations or the Boundaries of a Hermeneutic Gravity, or something along those lines. But a really dense, impenetrable paper, sent it to a key journal in the social sciences called Social Text, and it got accepted. And it was a really well-written spoof. And, you know, he was arguing that the laws of physics in that paper, the laws of physics are culturally determined. And, you know, the key quote is, anyone who believes that the laws of physics are mere social conventions, this was after when he revealed the spoof, anyone who believes that the laws of physics are mere social conventions is invited to try transgressing those conventions from the windows of my apartment. I live on the 21st floor. So the language is remarkable, and there are people like Karen Barad that we've talked about, who's a modern postmodernist. I think she'd probably describe herself as a postmodernist feminist. She comes from a physics background. I would say she is doing a vast amount of disservice to both feminism and to quantum physics. You know, the language, the density. I'll just read a couple of lines. Here's from one of our papers. According to my agential realist account, matter is not mere stuff, an inanimate givenness. Rather, matter is substance in its iterative, interactive becoming. Not a thing, but a doing, a congealing of agency. It is morphologically active, responsive, generative, and articulate. Mattering is the ongoing, interactive differentiating of the word, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it's impenetrable, and it's bullshit. Let's call out bullshit. However, so Peterson rails against this, and I would say he rails quite rightly against elements of this. Then you go and listen to what Peterson actually says. This is with Rogan. Here's some quotes directly from Peterson. It's an harmonious balancing of multiple layers of being. Your brain is attuned to telling you this. When you have an intimation of meaning, then you know you're there. Music is modeling the manner of being that's harmonious. Religious writings are guidelines to that mode of being. They're hyper-true or meta-true. So this is somebody who's held up by the sort of rational, skeptical crowd, the sort of anti-SJ, or whatever you want to call it, the leftist, whatever you want to say, as somebody who's worth listening to and who's making valid arguments. When you actually look at those arguments, I would argue that in many cases, his arguments are worse than the worst of postmodernism. And those are just some examples. I'll shut up after this. I've spent a lot of time listening to Peterson, but I'll shut up, I promise. But he has a brilliant, there's a brilliant podcast with Harris, Sam Harris, and I know some people might have difficulties with Sam Harris, but it's a podcast on the nature of truth, and it's just Harris and Peterson going at it for 2 hours. And Harris is razor sharp. He says, right, explain to me, when you say that this is your definition of truth, explain to me what it means. And Peterson never gets there. Maybe I've spoken enough. Maybe we can just try and bring somebody else in, but I'd like to come back to just Peterson's definition of truth and just how postmodern it is.
Well, what I
go
think
ahead,
is odd about it is that usually the conclusion of postmodern thinking is a kind of skepticism, whereas with Peterson, this is all done in the service of basically like Christian social conservatism, which is an odd conclusion to get to through skepticism about the nature of truth. Yeah. So I'm extra cautious about this because of the conclusion that he reaches, which is not just an attempt to like deconstruct and show the contingency of everything we believe, but instead is to like be like, you know, is with a social conservative end, usually the exact opposite of who would be making that kind of argument about truth.
He's a conservative postmodernist. You step back and look at it objectively, and it's fascinating. And because it's exactly that, he's coming from a Christian right of center view. But you know, here's just 2 quotes. It's worth listening to. For anybody who's claiming that Peterson is the Messiah, and there are many claiming that Peterson is the Messiah, and he's going to save the Western world from the evils of the cultural Marxist SJWs. Just listen to what he's saying. Harris. This is from the discussion, the podcast. Her concept of the truth value of any given statement cannot be held hostage to its ultimate result for the survival of the species in the end. Which, how could you deny that? So Peterson says, yes, I think it can. That the survival of the species, and whether a particular amount of information has helped the survival of the species, this is what he calls Darwinian truth, that can affect the truth value of something. It's beyond bonkers. It is beyond bonkers. And yet, what's remarkable is that if this was coming from the left, Peterson's audience would pillory the leftist academic that said this, who was basically taking religious truth and placing it on a higher footing than scientific truth. That's what he's saying. He's saying that biblical truths are on a higher footing than science. If that was coming from the left, they would pillory him. Well, certainly the skeptical, rational crowd.
It's interesting because I think part of the problem is often the left is just not well understood by people outside of it. And one of those ways that comes up is the confusion between Marxism and postmodernism, or the way that Marxism and postmodernism are used interchangeably. When you look at the kind of philosophical debate that it had between these 2 groups, actually, these 2 groups are very hostile toward each other, Marxists and postmodernists, because postmodernism is seen to be actually completely undercutting Marxism because it creates all this skepticism about the sort of materialist, all-encompassing historical story that a Marxist wants to tell. And so a postmodernist is sort of inherently anti-Marxist, or non-Marxist anyway. So, I mean, but you know, these kinds of distinctions are not being made. All this is just basically, these are just scare words. It's like, you know, cultural Marxism, which is not a thing. It's just it's the notion that like, it just refers to the vague notion that leftist academics are undermining the West with a variety of not contradictory strategies.
Yeah, if I might. I mean, I don't know. I'll let you. Sorry, I don't have much to say on Peterson, so I'm happy to let other people talk. But my impression is, you know, he's got his own expertise in a field that really doesn't have anything to do with the discourse around social justice. But he became famous because he took a position that a lot of anti-SJWs liked. And they sort of embraced him without really understanding, kind of like, you know, with Milo. I mean, they're basically willing to look the other way at his Roman Catholicism and his other, other things that he said that were offensive because he agreed with them on some issues. And he seems, Peterson, not Milo, in this case, has become, a hero of people who, if they were actually skeptical, as they claim to be, would maybe say, yeah, I agree with him here, but he's wrong on this and this and this and this and this.
But they don't. They accept. And Harris, it comes up with this great example. He's just so tenacious. It's remarkable, and he's so eloquent. He does what any scientist should. He's like a model for really how a scientist should behave. It's like, cut the crap, explain this to me in clear terms. Any physicist, you know, the first thing we ask is, what would Feynman say? And if Feynman was to listen to what Peterson was saying, he'd be absolutely appalled, because Harris puts up this great example where let's take the smallpox virus. Let's say we've got a group of scientists over here who are working on the smallpox virus, but they're using it in terms of a vaccine. And over here, working on smallpox, but they're using it to wipe out the world. Peterson's view, and this is no exaggeration, is that the moral framework under which these two are working, or the ultimate survival associated with whether smallpox is treated one way or the other, affects the truth of the biochemistry of smallpox. And Harris is gobsmacked by this and goes round in circles for 2 hours. And Peterson claims this. You can go and listen to the podcast. Anybody who thinks who's listening and thinks this isn't true, go and listen to that podcast and try and do it with an open mind. Because what Peterson is claiming is the worst type of postmodernism. It is appalling. And it is remarkable that he rails against one type of postmodernism, but is very happy from a religious perspective to try and, introduce it. You know, when you're arguing and you're trying to change what the term truth means, which is what he's doing, he's trying to redefine truth. And Harris makes this point, you know, Peterson rails against him. Where he got a lot of his fame was in, well, I'm not going to use those particular pronouns. I'm not going to refer to you like that. My freedom of speech. What he's doing in terms of truth and trying to redefine truth is a much worse abuse of language, Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what he got famous. What his fame and celebrity and praise is all about, his being the brave one who refused to use his students' preferred pronouns. And I mean, the fact that this is what the rationalists have embraced him for is like, they care more about like hostility to trans and like gender non-conforming people than they care about their idea of truth, their idea about God, their idea about, you know, psychology and biology. It's hard for me to look at this kind of thing happen again and again and think that anything is going on here but like sort of bigotry finding excuses for itself. I mean, if it seems like with their core values, the hills they're willing to die on are not using people's preferred pronouns. That's the most important thing. More important than God, more important than truth. Like, come on, guys. Like, don't think I'm going to look at that and walk away thinking that anything besides hostility to current social movements is at play.
It is surprising to me always when somebody who is in a scientific discipline doesn't extend that out to every part of their life. Because that's what I do. I had a colleague who several years ago watched this sort of conspiracy theory video because her husband was convinced, and she found it really convincing too. And I asked, just tell me this. Would you be willing to put your name to that information you saw and submit it to a journal for peer review? And she thought and went, no. I'm like, then that's all you need to know. Like, that's really, for me, that's the standard for everything.
It's interesting though. I have colleagues though who are quite religious, and you know, for me that does involve a sort of cognitive dissonance. For them, it doesn't, and it's interesting. I've had much better discussions with those people of faith, much more constructive, certainly much more civil. Than any of the sort of new atheists that I've come across. And that's worrying, isn't it? That we've reached a point where somebody of faith can put together a more constructive argument than somebody who's meant to be an atheist and meant to be driven by rationalism and logic, yeah. So.
No, I can actually, sorry, just really quickly, and then I'll let you go. From firsthand experience, you know, I was trying to set up a debate with Bering. That was the person who was trying to third party it, was the white YouTuber. And the white YouTuber was civil, but of course Bering was just insulting almost every single thing he sent. In contrast, I'm doing a debate now with the Distributist channel, and my understanding is that he's pretty religious. And we had exchanges, and I thought, okay, let's get the moderators in here right away because I don't want to be shouted at. You know what? He's been entirely civil. It's been pleasant. We've agreed on almost everything, and things we disagreed on, we just went, oh yeah, I see your point on that. We can make that change. So it is true that, you know, I am having a better conversation with somebody who is coming from a position of faith than I can have with somebody like who is supposed to be in the community of atheists on YouTube. So that was my point. Well,
I think
anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, I think part of what's at play is just a misunderstanding about what logic and reason are and like what they do and don't do. I mean, I think, you know, Thomas Aquinas is very logical. Like, he's very skilled at the practice of moving from one idea to the other using a series of logical rules. But logic is just like, that's all logic is. It's a strategy for building coherent beliefs. It doesn't, you know, and so people talk about it, but the way it's used by some atheists, it's more of like a style or a posture than it is about moving from premise A to conclusion C. Like, it's, they don't seem to grasp the limitation of it and or what it is. They just think it's like speaking in a deep masculine voice close to the microphone while ranting about SJWs. Like, that's what logic seems to mean to them.
Yeah.
I totally get your point. And yeah, I would say Psi 10 Bruggencate has an incredibly, if you start at the position that he starts from, everything falls perfectly into place. I think it's all perfectly logical as long as you have that presuppositionalist. It
So,
just...
who was that you said again? I didn't quite catch the name.
Oh, Psi 10 Bruggencate, who...
Yeah, can you give a little bit of background?
Yeah,
And
because I don't know who that is.
Shout out your video too.
Sorry. So he's one of these presuppositionalists who came out a few years ago. He did some debates with some atheists, sort of. They were ridiculous. They were the worst things, you know, the worst things I've ever seen. But, you know, there was a whole conversation that I remember having with these atheists saying, does he really believe this stuff? You know, can he? Of course he does. And it's all perfectly logical. If you start where he starts, everything works out. Like, it's the things he says about, I think they asked him about religion and government. And he said, well, the best kind of government would be a Christian theocracy, which shocked them. But of course, if you start out with Christianity is the way, the truth, and there is no bones about it, of course a Christian theocracy would be the best government. Like, it makes total sense, right? So, and I also agree that they don't know what skepticism is, because I think they've got about half of it. Like, I think they've got the piece where if somebody comes to you with a claim, you should ask for evidence of it, though they only apply that in a very motivated way, right? So if you come with a claim that you have seen sexual harassment in your life, then you better have, like, I don't know, the entire team CEI. What was that? What's that show? CEI? Crime scene analysis, CSI.
CSI.
Right?
Yeah,
You have the whole CSI New York behind you. But if you were to come and say SJWs are ruining the entire universe, well, you don't need anything from that. But, you know, but the other part that they don't seem to have at all is that you're not, skepticism means you don't make crazy claims either. Like, it's about not coming up with your own crazy crap to supplant other people's crazy crap. And I think there is a lot of bigotry. I think bigotry and the defense of bigotry is huge. There is a huge piece of the skeptical community. And I think another thing is they're so myopic about being on YouTube. I think they're amazingly myopic about that. So the skeptics, honest to God, think that they won. They won religion. They won Christianity. They beat it because it's not on YouTube. So, I'm saying the other day, somebody's telling me, oh, Ken Ham is a joke. He should be laughing at you, dude. He's making money, taking money from the government to build that ark. We can't give money to our schools, and he lets school kids in for $1 a pop, so they could go. So at the same time, Betsy DeVos who is a religious fundamentalist wackadoo, is in charge of our education system.
Precisely. Yeah,
Trump
and these are
So exactly. You did not win. You're not going to win social justice because you pwned us, and you're not.
Yeah,
Trump religion.
Yeah, Trump is, changing the rules so that churches can participate in politics and people can preach from politics, how to vote from the pulpit and get involved in political campaigns because they were barred because they're religious institutions. But I don't see videos on that. I mean, aside from Dusty Smith, who I don't always agree with, but when I agree with them, I agree with them almost 100%.
Yeah,
and his critiques lately have been really good. Yeah.
To be fair to Phil Mason, he and I have had our battles, to put it mildly. But to be fair to him, he's certainly called out behaviour in that community. I'll give him kudos, and I actually sent him an email to give him kudos. I just wish he'd cut out the other aspects, but he critiqued that, and fair play to him for critiquing what was some fairly despicable behaviour in that community. Moreover, he's always said, because his politics are actually quite close to mine in some ways, he's always pointed out, why the hell are you voting for Trump? Described by the American Physical Society as anti-science. Well, you're the rationalists, you're the skeptics, and you want somebody who's anti-science. Don't pretend you're rational, don't pretend you're skeptical.
Yeah, I think that's why we talked about how people in academia, sometimes they don't value enough the importance of the things going on online and so on. I think the other side of that is that people on YouTube, especially these skeptical pundits, they overestimate the importance of YouTube, or they greatly overestimate their own importance and influence, to the point where, as Chris was saying, you have these people who delusionally think that they have vanquished Christianity, which is sad to say, not even close to the case. Yeah, maybe on YouTube, but there's a limit to this platform too.
Although they do have, and there are many examples of this because they don't actually do much in the way of activism, but we recently saw where Sargon of Akkad basically signal boosted things off of the 8chan poll board, which is filled with alt-right people and white nationalists and bigots, their campaign to mess with the survey on LGBT discrimination experiences in the UK that was being run by the government. So, this is, what the title was, the dark side of engagement, which is part of what academics aren't prepared for is the harassment. I've got colleagues who work on far-right politics and also Welsh politics and Scottish politics who get really vile emails because they're public experts on these topics. And that's not really something, and the more that online communication becomes prominent and becomes a metric by which academics, at least in the UK, might be measured, then you're opening yourself up for a lot of harassment and your institutions. And, there is every chance of, and it has happened, where people have tried to go after someone's employment by emailing people in their department.
Absolutely.
In order to, basically get them in trouble to silence them.
Absolutely.
So
Let's just say that resonates.
Institutions aren't dealing with or coping with very well yet.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Philip. I just want to finish my thought.
No. I agree entirely with all of that Kristi. And again, it's the arguments. It's interesting when they're asked to define a social justice warrior, and I've said this all along, and I stick by it. The warriorism from the other side is just as strong as the warriorism from this side. There's political correctness, you might argue, though Stuart Lee. It's well worth watching Stuart Lee's videos on the question of political correctness. There's what some have called patriotic correctness on the other side, where there's nationalism. You don't dare ever think about defaming the flag or whatever, burning the flag, etc. Everything that is that the sort of left is accused of, you can map right back in terms of the hypersensitivity. They're complaining about Dr. I'm going to swear now, apologies, I think this is the first time I've sworn. Doctor fucking Who. This is what sets them on fire. Doctor Who, Ghostbusters, superheroes with tins of pasta, and then they claim that the left is shrill and hypersensitive.
Hashtag
And you can just
virtual
map
problems.
this across every single aspect of it. You can map across everything. And you know, the hive mind, Kekistani bloody fags. And of course they'll say, well, that's ironic. Sure, it's ironic. Sure, you're using that flag. You're not trying to signal your particular allegiance to a particular group. Not at all. It's ironic. You're all individuals. Everything you can track across. And of course, that's what you'd expect, because we've all got our biases, we've all got our ideologies. And, you know, what is frustrating is that one group tends to say, well, we're much more rational and much more skeptical. I don't know, to label yourself as a skeptic, I don't know, I wouldn't label myself as a skeptic. What, a skeptic about what? Skeptic about the moon landings? Not at all. Skeptic about, I don't know, homeopathy? Yes. But you've got to define that skepticism in a certain context. Skeptic about Pizzagate? Yeah. Skeptic about 9/11 truthers? Yeah. It's just it's just too broad a term. And I don't think it's a very helpful term at all.
Well, I mean, in that sense, the use of skeptic, and you know, it's skeptics, or is it a skeptic or is it a denier? I mean, this becomes like freedom fighter terrorist at a certain point, where if it's, I don't believe in something that I think is false, I'm a skeptic. If someone else doesn't believe something I think is true, they're a denier. So then it becomes pretty empty at that point. I mean, if skepticism, the way skepticism is used online anyway, and sort of as the descendant of this new atheist thing, I mean, it's really specifically, it refers to supposedly skepticism about this, like, you know, religion and about these pseudosciences, but then it's now, what is it? It's just right-wing politics. And if you want to talk about skepticism as philosophy, you know, this has nothing to do with like ancient Athenian skepticism. I mean, which in some ways is closer to what they were calling postmodernism, like the skepticism about just like the human ability to really know things. Like that's skepticism, and they certainly are hostile to that. So,
apart from if it comes from Peterson.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
Well, as long as it's accompanied by right-wing politics, they're fine with it.
Then it's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of this is, you know, Paul J. Watson's conservatism is the new punk rock. I agree with him. I find it absolutely, but I find it staggering that the way to be edgy now is to behave like a reactionary 80-year-old Christian grandmother.
Yeah, right. These are racist grandmothers from Kansas. Like, it's not edgy. It's pathetic. Yeah.
They're as sort of radical in that way as the Islamists that they despise, in terms of where they are culturally. You know, you said 80-year-old highly religious women. You know, that's what something that, you know, somebody who was fighting for a teenage boy fighting for ISIS and an old, very devout, you know, radical woman would think. A fundamentalist in her own community, and they're aligned more with that ideology than they are with humanism.
Are you familiar with Alf Garnett, Kristi? You heard of Alf Garnett? Comedy character, Until Death Do Us Part. So he was a 70s sitcom, very, very popular in the UK, and he's basically a bigot. You know, bloody immigrants coming over here, taking our jobs, taking our women, etc., etc., etc.
That might have been the basis for
edginess.
Yeah, that might have been the basis for All in the Family, the Archie Bunker.
Yes, yeah. Like anything, I've got to say, that crosses the Atlantic, it tends to get a bit worse. Sorry. Oh, no, that was awful. Sorry, Tom.
That's okay. But on the issue of online abuse, just because I had the thought and I want to get it out there before it goes away. One of the things that, if you look at academia and the in engagement, public engagement, having impact, at least with regard to British universities, in terms of like political science, it's not enough to say go out there and explain an election result in terms of a distribution of a shift in the vote in a particular, you know, constituency. That's just media appearances. So for us as political scientists to have impact, we have to have like policy impact. It's, you know, but promoting the university and getting out there and getting sort of star celebrity people who are associated and can be a spokesperson for the university, that is also something that's encouraged, even though it's not as rewarded. But women and what we would say in the UK, BME, or people of color, face different kinds of harassment, different levels of harassment when they do that kind of engagement. Like my colleagues who work on far-right politics and national politics are all white men. So, they don't get rape threats. They don't get racist insults. And I do think that when it comes to public engagement online and putting academics out there, for instance, on YouTube, and then one of my colleagues was mass downvoted for one of his TED Talks by people on a certain extreme political position.
Yeah.
And then, so yes, kind of bringing it on to that point.
Yeah, no, that the downvote, I smiled when you said the downvoting. So I do this, as I mentioned, 60 Symbols videos of a guy called Brady Harron, his brainchild, his channel. Really, we don't even see those videos. The first time we see them is actually when they go online. But I love that the last two 60 Symbols videos since the fallout with Phil Mason, etc., it's sociologically, it's just wonderful. So pure science videos, absolutely no discussion of anything to do with politics, nothing to do with gender balance, nothing to do with any type of social justice, pure science. First one was about work done at a synchrotron, which is like a particle accelerator. The most recent one is about bloody gauge blocks and what holds gauge blocks together as calibration standards. Downvoted, lots and lots of comments about Moriarty's a bloody SJW. It's remarkable that videos from apparently rational skeptics, they are so emotionally connected. They are so emotionally connected with the presenter that they can't leave they can't leave that behind to just think about the science and to be fair, some who I debated, I recognize the avatars and the usernames, some with whom I've debated when I used to have the channel up there, make exactly that point. So, we shouldn't, just as they shouldn't bunch us all together, we shouldn't bunch all of them together. Not that he'll watch this, but there's a guy called who's made exactly that point on the last two 60 Symbols videos. Look, put the politics to one side, this is about science. But again, it just shoots down their argument that what they're interested in is rational, logical debate. They are just as emotional. The more rabid ones are just as emotional as what they claim the left. They are just as shrill and just as connected. It's interesting.
Oh, sorry. Did anyone else? I was going to let the conversation naturally flow, and then there was a gap and nobody jumped in. So did anyone else want to come in on that, or also pick up anything else on Jordan Peterson or other points? Otherwise, there have been requests, just so you know, there have been requests in the chat for question taking. And also, hey, shout out to the people in the chat. The chat is really cool. There was a lot of great people there. I don't want to give any particular shout outs because if I start shouting out one person, then other people will want shout outs, so I can't get started. But
let's take the chat. Yeah, that's good. That's much more interesting.
All right. So because it's a slight lag. Yeah, so why don't you guys continue on? I'll take questions and paste them into a document, and then in a few minutes, because like I said, the lag, then I will come back in and start throwing out some questions.
Okay. Contra, I've ranted for enough. Do you want to have a rant? Kristi, do you want to have a rant?
Well, I always want to have a rant. So I mean, just start me off and I'll go somewhere.
Oh, we could talk about peer review. That's another aspect, I guess, that we haven't touched on.
Can I?
Yeah. Sorry, there was a Potholer 54 video on his peer review trustworthy that would be relevant if you guys have seen it. But yeah, sorry, Kristi, don't want to interrupt you, but I did.
No, it's all right. Well, I did want to point out that a big part of what Sargon was doing, I mean, at least half of what Sargon did when he was, sending people to this was trying to sabotage an LGBT study, a study that was going to find out, what people were facing, because, and let's not even pretend that didn't have anything to do with it, that he didn't pick that study for a reason. But he's also trying to take social sciences and I've seen more and more of this, like on Twitter and online, people trying to really actively sabotage the social sciences because they don't want to hear what it has to say, right?
Yeah.
And you know, when I said, well, this sucks that he did this, people are saying, well, it just goes to show that social science isn't, you know, good. I said, that's ridiculous. If a study can be sabotaged, and that means that study isn't good, what studies would be good? I mean, I can go break into a lab and start switching around, you know, labels on jars and stuff. You know, people can fake their results or commit fraud or, you know, just screw up. There's 100 different ways that you can screw up and still make through peer review, even sometimes, depending. But that doesn't mean, what are you going to do now? Throw out the scientific method? Decide we're not going to think about these things anymore?
This hostility to social science is one of the most frustrating things to me about having debates with a lot of these people, because they're basically throwing out most of the relevant evidence when they announce that that social science isn't sense, and they refuse to consider any of it. I mean, I think that, at least in my opinion, gender and race are topics that need to be studied in a fundamentally different way than the way you study particle physics. And if you've decided a priori that cultural anthropology is bullshit and I refuse to listen to any of it, then you're really missing out on what I think is a large portion of the relevant empirical evidence. And so when you're dealing with people who just refuse to look at that and dismiss it out of hand, it's sort of like, it's hard to have an even intelligent discussion about the topic.
Absolutely. And what is remarkable is that they will dismiss social sciences out of hand, but they'll take the cruddiest of evolutionary psychology papers.
Yeah.
With absolutely nothing beyond, well, this is a nice story I'm telling here, and hold that up as strong evidence. The other thing is that there was this sting recently. What was the name of the paper? The conceptual penis as a social construct. Do you remember that? So Dawkins hopped up and down about it. So what's really interesting about this is what they I think they eventually admitted, but I'm not entirely certain at what point of the process. They submitted that to actually one of the higher quality social science journals or gender studies journals, and it was rejected. To a predatory journal, and it was accepted. Anything can get accepted in a predatory journal. It's not like the Sakal hoax. The Sakal hoax was a very clever, intelligent. This was a really, it says more about the fact that Dawkins would hop up and down about this, and others like it. And you know, I've got God delusion on my shelves. I used to be, and still am in some ways, a fan of Dawkins in terms of you know, his core message, if you want to put that. He's gone a little bit off the rails of late, but that he would unskeptically, and others like him, jump up and down and say, oh, look, bingo, gotcha, we've got the social sciences again. When anybody can get published in a predatory journal, the best example of which is there's a wonderful example in computer science. As academics, pretty well every day now, we get bloody emails from journals and conferences saying, come get your conference. What I love is those that say, dear respected sir, due to your fantastic contributions in the field of astrophysics, I've never published an astrophysics paper in my life. And you get these things. So what this guy did was construct a paper, which is, the title is, Take Me Off Your Fucking Mailing List. The whole body of the text is take me off your fucking mailing list. Figure 1 is a flow diagram with take me off your fucking mailing list. And it was accepted.
So people probably don't know how these journals works. So it's like pay to publish, essentially, right? Like it's that's what a predatory journal is. You pay them money effectively to publish your article. There's no review whatsoever, or not any sophisticated.
Well, they claim there is. They claim there is. And the problem is the pressure on research.
Hello?
Oh, did the internet just
maybe
go
he
on?
dropped out. Okay. Well, if he dropped out, he'll join back in, and it's okay because we have so many questions, you guys. Wow. So we're gonna start with those now. So yeah, there's a lot of really great people in the chat. I don't want to suck up to the chat, but I guess I am sucking up to the chat. But starting with the first question that I saw, it comes from Katharina. My German is Katharina Jansen. Catherine, probably in English. Jansen. Now, this question you're going to have to kind of define for yourself to the people answering it, Chrisiousity and Contra. Which disagreements in the social justice sphere do you find valuable and productive to discuss? And then she's got another one, but I'd rather go through other people's questions and then come back to hers at the end, if we have time.
Well, I guess one of the main disagreements has simply to do with strategy. So I find that I have had a lot of disagreements with how should we respond, how should we react to other people online who have done problematic or even, like, you know, outright bad things in the past. So is it okay to go have a public, you know, meetup with, I don't know, Sargon or someone like that? Maybe this isn't a productive conversation, but it's an important conversation to have, because there are a lot of people who think that we should not be engaging with people like that in a way, and you know, except with outright hostility. And I sort of see that because of the situation that we're in online, where so many people are abused and mistreated. But at the same time, I also think that if you choose the right person, if you choose the shitlord right, then you know, it can be helpful to publicly be seen having a friendly conversation, because so much of the hostility to us is based on the assumption that we won't listen to the other side and that we refuse to have a debate, you know. So if you can, I mean, this is something I deal with all the time, is my decision to have public debates with people like Blair White and Lacey Green and you know, a lot of SJWs don't think I'm either just doing nothing good, or that I'm actually harming things. And I don't know. I think that that's a conversation that's a major source of division on our side that's worth having.
Definitely. Sorry, I dropped out. The Wi-Fi just dropped out for a while, so I missed some of that, but I got the general gist from the last few sentences. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, over the years, I've told Kristi this before. I'd say I probably wrote just in comments alone and tweets probably 500,000 words. If you add up what you've written, any of you, I think you're probably at the same. You think about it, that's a few books worth. How much of that, if I look back on that and I think how much of that was productive, 10%, maybe 10%. Waste of time. Particularly because, you know, this idea that if you, it comes back to the marketplace of ideas. There's a neat sort of circularity there. It's the idea that if you just put your message across rationally and logically, etc., and clearly, that you're going to converge. That's nonsense. We know that's nonsense. So then it's a question of, are you doing it? It comes back to the video you did, Contra, on sort of why bother debating in the first place. Then it comes back to sort of convincing the audience. But the audience is polarized as well, exceptionally polarized. And Peterson, again, is a great example of this. You listen to that, anybody who comes back, who stands back and listens to that with an open mind, will hear Sam Harris, a razor-sharp focus, trying to address this point. And Peterson flails around. He's a very bright man. I don't want to slag him off, and I don't want to get into the position of smearing him. He's a very bright, very eloquent, very charismatic, but he flails around. And you look at the comments and you get nonsense like, well, Peterson wrecked Harris. Yeah. When anybody with any ounce of objectivity would say, no, this man flailed around and couldn't address the comments. What is the point of debating then?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had experiences where I've done a debate. I won't say which, I guess, but I felt like the result was just absolutely, like, I may as well not have done it, in terms of, you know, nothing I could say could ever come across as anything except me being emotional, because they're just so pre-primed to see that all they see in anything I say is me expressing my emotions. And even if that's not what I did, I was sitting there talking about scientific papers and things like they've just decided a priori that I'm emotive, whereas the person I'm arguing with is factual. And so that's what they see no matter what happens. So if you realize that that's the situation you're in, or you have someone you know, a YouTuber, again, I won't name any names to avoid drama, but some YouTubers who just have kind of ponage channels, their audience is not there to consider new ideas. Their audience is there to be entertained at other people's expense. And in those contexts, there's no point in subjecting yourself to it.
No, again, and so that's a very good point, Contra. I would argue, why are we bickering? When we bicker with that type of YouTuber, and we know we can all think of examples, what is it doing? Increasing their income. Yeah. So why do we do it? You know, because it's not about debate and discussion. You know, there are some YouTubers out there who I did debate and did discuss with, and those were quite useful on the other side. Gary Edwards being an example, and Noah Plum, I know, have their differences. I guess I shouldn't. I'm disobeying my own rule in terms of or my own suggestion in terms of naming people. But those, you know, those were reasonable discussions. There are others. It's pointless. It's pointless. And as you say, the channel is not there. However much they might claim about being all about reason and logic, etc., and about reason, debate, etc., it's there because the audience likes seeing people slagged off.
Yeah, I think the essential thing is just discretion when it comes to choosing who to engage with and on what platform to do it. I mean, I think I'm generally like in favor of having these discussions and debates, fine, but you just have to make sure before you do it that you're choosing a venue and a debate partner who are worth having a discussion with. There has to be some imaginable positive outcome for you, because there are channels on YouTube that I will not go on those channels and debate them, even if I'm invited, because I know that just nothing I can say will help me or anyone else. It would, you know, I'm just submitting myself to be fodder for their easy money scheme, effectively.
All right, so I'm going to intervene here because we still have 4 more questions to get to. So I'm going to take it over. So yeah, we'll have to be a bit more brief.
Can I just go and get a coffee? Yeah. Would that be okay? It's been 2 hours, damn near 2 hours, Kristi. My caffeine level's dropping dramatically.
That's okay. Yeah, I've had to go to fill my drink and just let you guys talk, and I left.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
Right, I'm going. I'll be back in a minute.
So I'll remind you what the question wording was, Chrisiousity, but also to the people in the chat who said that I'm a good moderator, thank you. I appreciate that, you guys. All right, so the wording of the question, again, was, which disagreements in the social justice sphere do you find valuable and productive to discuss?
I think that there is an ongoing discussion about allyship that I think is important that we're having right now, and what it means and what the limitations of it are. I think that's one that I've just personally been talking about with some people before, because it's a very fraught, I think. There's something, you know, when I look at somebody like some of the people that we hang out with, Foxy Jezebel does not need my allyship any more than, you know, she needs, you know, a hole in her head. Like so this idea that there's a rescuing element to it that we need to like get out of. There's a sense of entitlement. Like, if I'm your ally, you have to be nice to me and give me cookies. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of different, but at the same time, I think there's something very positive about it and very necessary about it. So I found that to be just recently an interesting conversation. It's that's just me.
I totally agree with that. I think that allies are a completely necessary part of any kind of social justice movement. You can't do it alone. But I think that there arise all these different ways that good intentioned efforts to help can go badly. And so that's always, you know, I think that in my particular case, one thing I noticed recently is people they're trying to stand up for someone or some other group, but in doing it, they do it in this incredibly like aggressive, combative way that causes like the heat to increase around the topic. And it's like, ooh, you're just making it harder for us. Like, you're making it harder for them. So it's true that you can kind of fuck up. Well, even if you're trying to do the right thing. So I think, yeah, that's kind of an ongoing conversation that's worth having.
So yeah, I have, there's a small channel here, Rin Michaelis, that she's great. I love her. She's sort of on the other side, if you will. And one of her biggest concerns, because of her, you know, she's a Black woman, she's doesn't have a lot of money, she doesn't come from money. She says, you know, you have these fights, and then the alt-right gets bigger, and they come after me. You know, they don't come after you.
That's exactly what I'm worried about. Yeah.
You know, they're not coming to get white girl, you know, in Boston. They're coming my way, and I'm going to get screwed. And if you being nicer means less of that, then that's what you should do. And so I totally understand that. And I also, you know, but then you're also in this weird position of, well, how much nicer can you be if people are coming at you with Nazi flags? Like, where am I going to draw that line? It's very complicated.
Yeah, I agree.
I did the video about the social survey or the government survey, and I was doing it for a lot of reasons, but mostly I was wearing my social scientist hat because I think data quality is important. And it was not only a chance to point out a wrong, but also a bit of a learning opportunity. You could point out things about, there are ways to check the quality of online data, and people can do stuff to mitigate these kinds of harassment or at least disruptive campaigns. But someone in the comments said, I'm lesbian and I just want to thank you for doing this. And I hadn't really thought about doing the video as an ally. But it was, I guess, a form of allyship, and that's the kind of stuff I want to do. Like, and maybe I'm just, that's because of my background, I can do that. I can look at, I haven't done too many statistics in terms of Black Lives Matter, but when it kind of flared up a few months back, I did spend some time on the videos and coming at it more from a social science perspective, and also from a moral perspective about their actual policies, what they actually want to get in terms of having independent citizen councils review police shootings, not have it be inside the department, about demilitarizing our police. They've got freaking stuff used in the Iraq War rolling down American streets. So anyway, I'm getting off tangent, but I think yeah, there is obviously an important role that you have as a white person. I have a level of credibility to stand up to somebody who's a racist, who's a white supremacist, because they will listen to me because I'm white. For them, that's not my argument. That's my validating factor. And so I think we have to own those privileges basically and use them to say, what, that's not okay, or what, that's, you get every other word in the dictionary. Can you just leave that one out? Just all the other words, you have, use all of them. But can you just can you restrict yourself? That kind of activism is as important, but the whole idea again of, you don't want to get into the rescuing or being aggressive or doing it to get patted on the back.
Yeah, and you gotta check yourself to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, because this is something I catch myself with. I'm like, okay, why am I arguing with these racists right now? Am I doing it because I'm going to help something, or am I doing it to show that I'm smarter than them? Like, it's something that's worth continually asking yourself.
I agree, and I got trapped in that as well. And particularly academics, I think it's interesting. I spoke to a friend, a colleague, who's a philosopher, and he said he was torn between doing physics or philosophy. And I said, well, why did you choose philosophy over physics? And he bluntly said, because I like arguing. That was his response. And an awful lot of academics are like that, because that's the way the system is set up. You give presentations, you expect a relatively hostile audience, you expect to get questions, so you get drawn into these. I left Twitter because I find myself, when you find yourself arguing with Louise Mensch at morning, you got to look at your life and say, what the fuck am I doing here? LOL. This is the argument. What am I doing? And it is a question. You have to choose what is important to you. And if you're argumentative, as I think we all probably are, you can get drawn into these things very quickly, and they can get actually dangerous in some cases. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's a similar problem for entertainment too, because some of what I do anyway on YouTube is entertainment as much as it is argument.
Oh,
So,
it most definitely is.
yeah.
Yes.
And so sometimes when it's like I'm making this like big spectacle out of like making white nationalists look preposterous, and I don't want to do it if I think that is hurting things. I wouldn't do it if I thought it was hurting. So I want to think that so I think it's fun. Yes, that's one reason to do it. But I also think that this kind of making them into an entertainment spectacle can help people see them as not serious,
and to come to it. Yeah, absolutely.
And it pulls people away from them by making them look ridiculous. But I think that it has to be done in a way, and it's not a way where you're sort of conscious of the fact that like you could be exploiting a dangerous situation for fun, and that you don't want to make sure that you're not you're not putting anyone in danger, or that you're not putting fuel on a fire.
Yeah. Just while you're on this, sorry.
One last point, and then we go move on to the next question.
Okay, no, this is completely off tangent. It's my first time to be able to speak to Contra. As somebody who has got all the artistic and aesthetic sensibility of a ripe cabbage, your videos blow me away. Honestly, I wish I could get inside your mind. The last few in particular are just fucking phenomenal. Sorry, right? That's all the
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so we'll just leave that little blushing going on and move on to the question from Meg T, which Meg writes, I have a minimal Twitter presence, but when I see someone spouting misinformation on a topic I study, I want to get involved. Is this a good idea? Given that the last time I tried, I got swamped by people who didn't seem interested in learning. Is it counterproductive to get involved given how I could get smeared? Who wants to take that? Not Moriarty.
Sorry? What's that?
Not Moriarty. I don't think you have advice for Meg on. Well, maybe you do. Leave Twitter. But I was saying for people who are still on Twitter.
Yeah, no.
So this might not be a question for you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm willing to sit this one out.
This is really difficult. Did you have something smarter that I did to say? Probably. I was just going to tell her that it's really. If you think if you're not ready for it, don't do it. Like if you're not ready to get swamped by jerks, then don't. If it's not worth it to you, because there's only so much you're going to be able to do, even in the very best of situations. Sometimes I'm really awful on Twitter, and this is going to sound weird. I think that sometimes some of these dudes need to know that they can't push women around. And I think that, so I push back hard, because I see too much of it. I saw somebody tweeting Elizabeth Warren about something about constitutional law, which she's only like one of the highest cited constitutional lawyers, taught at Harvard, is a senator, and they're like, hey, sweetheart, don't worry. I looked in the Constitution, but this wasn't in there, and you see this sort of, you see a lot of this sort of thing from the sort of skeptics. I get called sweetie, I get called hysterical when I'm just talking. And so sometimes I come back pretty hard to people, because I think you need to know that you can't push everybody around. And I think you need to have the experience of a woman who's a real in-your-face bitch sometimes. I don't know, that may be counterproductive or foolish, but I think sometimes women do have to be more assertive, and the more women who are more assertive, hopefully it will become more normalized.
It just get things done.
Yeah, I don't know. It might just be completely stupid and unproductive, but.
What did you say, Kristi? I missed that. Sorry.
Oh, it was quoting Tina Fey and one other comedian on SNL talking about Hillary Clinton. She's saying, you know what? I'm a bitch, and so is she. And you want to know what? Bitches get things done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, Contrapoints, anything that you want to add, and then I'll throw in
I would say by way of advice that if you're going to engage on Twitter, always remember that you can turn it off and log out, and that you should do that if you're getting hurt or upset, because usually once you're at that point, nothing that happens after that point is going to do any good. So for you or for anyone else. So if you want to help people on Twitter, I think we need people to help, and it's much appreciated if you want to do that. So show up, help when you're feeling calm and okay, If you're getting too upset, if it's hurting you, go do something else and then come back again when you're ready.
I hate to, I know I'm outside of this, and so disregard what I'm going to say, but to what extent, you know, it comes back to the previous point. There's a willing audience out there who will take those tweets and who will push and push and push and push to try and get you to explode, for example. In terms of feeding their fire, for them, I will stress this again, this is their job. This is their livelihood. This is what they're looking for. They're looking for a response. Is it about rational debate and discussion? No. I've said time and time again, you want to have a rational debate and discussion with me? Well, you write 500 words. I'll respond with 500 words. You write 500 words, because then you take the gladiatorial aspect out of it, and it becomes a lot more about what's on the page and what's, you know, about the argument itself. This is gladiatorial. It's theatre. And in many ways, when we kick back, I've thought about this an awful lot. When we kick back, we're just, it's not a question of countering their norms. In some senses, in the worst cases, we may well be playing into their norms and helping them normalize this stuff. Now, I know that's contentious, and I know I stood back, occasionally write for different places, etc., and do the occasional YouTube video like this one, but is it healthy? That's what I'd say. Is it healthy? There's I think I mentioned this video that Peterson did about depression, etc. And, you know, for your mental health, I know I'll drop into snowflake mode. Very happy to be called a snowflake. For your mental health, is it really the best thing to be doing? Is it really the most productive thing? I said it's good. Yeah, I said it was going to be contentious. So.
Well, I'll give a more positive take, which is, at least for me, the experience of Twitter over the last 2 years has changed dramatically. When I first got on, you know, it was I didn't have that many followers, and I kind of connected with the people who are in this room. Well, not so much Moriarty, I think only briefly, perhaps. But initially, I got a lot more harassment than I got sort of camaraderie. But for me, at least, the Twitter community has changed a lot. And I would say one way that you could get involved, another direction for involvement that doesn't involve just sort of taking on people one-on-one is, you know, follow Tom Bloke, follow Vadim, follow, I think it's @InnerPartisan. There are a whole lot of people now on Twitter who are pretty much just out there to kind of, Sean and Jen, another one, who sort of do critique of the skeptics, the people who have been harassing us and leading these sort of, you know, anti-science approaches and ideologies, and get involved in conversations that they're already a part of. So, you know, follow them, look who responds. If you like somebody's response because it's kind of witty or they make a good point, follow that person, or make a comment in response to something they've said. So then you're not doing it just one-on-one. You're doing it as part of a larger argument. And that will hopefully, you know, make it easier, because they're not just then, you know, you respond to like up to what, 9 or 10 people in a tweet now. So it won't be as one-on-one as sort of just going up to somebody and saying, hey, here's a study you should read, and them, you know, just rejecting it because, you know, it's social science or something.
Which they'll do anyway, though. Sorry.
Yeah,
and I should say, John Cusack.
Oh, yeah.
John Cusack followed me the other day, so I'm there forever. I will always be.
Oh, wow. Oh, well done.
That's it. I'm done.
All right. So next question. So we'll try to do these faster, guys, or this is gonna be a 5-hour hangout, which I don't mind because it's Friday night and it's late and I'm fun. But anyway, so this is the question. Jordan Peterson has this view that postmodernism is a dangerous ideology that says nothing. How do we undo the damage done by the popularity of this Peterson ideology? Anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, it's interesting because I'll shut up after this because I'm going to say one thing. Actually, when it comes to postmodernism, I'm not really a fan. You know, I am not things that are particularly obscurantism and the impenetrable writing and the style over substance, all those types of things. That runs entirely counter to what I, as an academic, have been trained to do, which is to try and express myself. You might be surprised to hear this, to try to express myself as clearly as possible.
So, sorry, was the original question, was it asked, how do we undo the damage that's done by this
The
caricature
portrayal.
or portrayal
Yes.
of postmodernism. So I think maybe I'm like a little more sympathetic to postmodernism than the rest of the room, but certainly not the obscurantism or any of that nonsense, which I despise, and is one of the reasons I quit. But I think that, I mean, one thing that I think is difficult is just sort of a bad understanding of what. So a lot of the stuff that's labeled postmodern is just not really postmodern in the sense of that they think it is. So the derogatory use of postmodern would be like, completely like relativistic. There is no truth. Like it's just only like subjectivism and so on. So sometimes that accusation is lobbed against people who are trying to emphasize, for instance, the like different experiences that people have in the society. If you are black, or if you're trans, or if you're gay, or if you're a woman, and they read this as some kind of subjectivism, or again, the attempt to critique like a male privilege or something as being a kind of perspective that you have on the world, a set of assumptions, a way of seeing things that is the result from your sort of having this constantly validated point of view or something like that. The critique of that they see as being like, it gets misread as a kind of relativism, when really what it is a request to acknowledge the contingency and limitations of a certain perspective. And I think that is really worth doing. Like, it's worth understanding that because of who you are, because of your position in society, you have certain ways of looking at things and certain habits of thought, and these things kind of give you certain biases, and that's worth being aware of. And I don't think anything postmodern about that. So part of it is I think how to combat these misconceptions or this stereotype. The way to combat it, I would say, would be to try to be as crystal clear as possible in terms of presenting your ideas, so that without any obscurantism and without as little as jargon as possible, good ideas that are good and sensible, and ideas that can be expressed clearly should be expressed as clearly as possible. That what I think is the main rhetorical strategy.
Chrisiousity, do you want to come in on this? And then
I also have sympathy, at least, for the sort of postmodern ideas that you were just talking about. I agree with you on your take. So I think that in a way that this is going to be a little bit of a Milo Yiannopoulos situation, where we kind of have to wait for Jordan Peterson to discredit himself, which he will, because he's a bit of a turkey. He's very religious. He has some really weird ideas. And right now they are ignoring them. And I think that they can continue to ignore them and continue to ignore them. But at a certain point, something is going to give. I mean, that's actually my guess. Now, as far as, I actually think Armored Skeptic is probably in some ways worse for what, because he just completely misrepresents the entire concept of postmodernism. He came out and he made a video, which I have no idea what he was talking about. And it doesn't matter. But it was so wrong, that you're just, part of me was staggered that he would put a video together and just be wrong for so long. Like, it's like, it was ironically kind of postmodern in a way. But
yeah, that video made me want to come to the defense of postmodernism too, or at least like a certain what he is representing as postmodern. I wanted to defend. I don't know if I'll make a response to it, but I find that Armored Skeptic is worth talking to. At least in my case, I found him a person who's willing to listen. So I think that if someone should, maybe it should be me. Someone should engage him on that topic.
Yeah, I was in talks with Tim and Garrett actually to do parts of that video, because I'm with Chrisiousity. I just watched it and went, no, that's wrong. No, well, if not really. And maybe what we need to do is, Chrisioity, you and I need to just do a hangout where we watch it, because we both watched it through. I've actually already created a time frame from medieval philosophy to postmodernism, and to show the difference between the modern era and modernism, which he kind of complains. And so, yeah, we can maybe off air in the next couple of days talk about doing a hangout where we just break that whole thing down, because he does say things that aren't entirely wrong occasionally, but you have to get through a lot of the first bits where he's entirely wrong to do it.
Postmodernism came after modernism. I think after that it was it was just a mess. I'm sorry, I'm being very rude. No, I thought it was a mess. I thought the video was just a complete mess.
It's not like we're picking on him personally. It's like if somebody wrote that as an article and handed it to me, I'd be like, no, you actually need to go do a bibliography first.
It's interesting. I haven't listened to all of that Armored Skeptic video. I agree with Contra. He's not the worst. I don't think he's the worst. We can certainly point to others out there who are a hell of a lot worse.
I also sorry.
No, go on.
I also think that just the topic postmodernism, like, what does that mean? Like, it means it's used so many different ways in so many disciplines, and so someone who's trying to kind of like research this on Wikipedia and make a YouTube video about it might like you're trying to explain all of it at once, and it's like there's postmodern novels and postmodern philosophy and postmodern humor, and like attempting to describe all this under one heading is an impossible task, because it just means so many different things. And so like, I don't know. The reason I've have not immediately gotten to work on a video about the topic is simply because I'm like, how can I talk about this without making a 40-minute video?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I can't think how. Yeah.
I stress again, if you think that the Armored Skeptic video is bad, go and watch and listen to that Peterson-Harris exchange in terms of incredibly incoherent reasoning, exceptionally incoherent reasoning from a guy who's clearly a very accomplished lecturer. You can see how he could hold an audience in the palm of his hand, but when you have to strip down and look at what he's actually saying, it's, I would argue that he does a worse job than Armored Skeptic in trying to support his views.
Okay, so if I could move on, because the next question is just for Contra, so this shouldn't be too long because we shouldn't have too much to contribute to this question. What was your VidCon, was your VidCon experience negative or positive, or maybe a bit of both? And generally, how did you find things? Cheers.
Well, I don't know how much detail I want to go to on this, but I'll say that it was mixed experience. It was really interesting from a like anthropological point of view to go see what YouTube is like in person. I mean, one thing that reminds you of is that we, people who talk about politics and science and things, are just like a drop in the pond. Like, most of what YouTube is like teenagers watching like people with 55,000 Instagram followers. Like, that's what this website is. As far as meeting other YouTubers, I mean, I met a lot of people who do social justice and some of the people who do anti-social justice, and I thought it was good to sort of just be in the same room with the humanity of these other people, and I hope that it was the same for them too. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to meet some of the people who are sort of anti-social justice, because I thought it might help to sort of like, if they've shaken my hand and like seen my face, and like you realize that when you're tweeting at me, there's a person with a phone on the other end who's getting those messages. And I think that it's good to try to have everyone keep that in mind. And maybe VidCon or these physical meetups are a way for that to happen. At least that's what I kind of hope.
Can I, and I feel like this might get a little bit personal, and I'm not trying to call you out, Contra. Right after VidCon, I was dogpiled by fans of Shoe on Head and Bunty and a bunch of other people, and it was a really nasty dogpile. It actually changed my entire way of interacting with people on Twitter. It changed my way of interacting with people on my channel, because it was just vicious. And one of the things that was really difficult about it was that you were used as an excuse to dogpile me. And I know that was never your intention, and I hate that happened, but you were brought up, Dan Olson was brought up, Like, why can't you be nice like these people were nice to us? And it
well,
was like,
I mean, yeah. I mean, the thing is, yeah. So that is a fear I have about being nice, is that then people, especially under circumstances where I have no obligation to be nice, considering the circumstances, is that then people say that, and then they use me as an excuse to attack other people who justifiably may not always be so nice. But I think that also, I mean, so all this is based on some pictures that I decided to tweet. There are details about the pictures that I would change if I could change them, although I stand by my decision to meet up with Armored Skeptic and Show On Head. I think that these, I think it's worth talking to these people, and worth talking and worth having their fans see that you're willing to talk to them. However, I also think that people don't know what we talked about, and that they assume that we all just hung out and were friends, and assume that there was no confrontation at all. So I would guess I will ask people, try to remember that what you see in a tweet or what you see in one picture is a snapshot, and you don't really know what actually happened. And I would also say that if you want to try to use what I personally am comfortable with as a strategy, and what I personally am comfortable with in terms of how I interact with other people online as an excuse to attack other people who do it differently, I don't support you and I don't endorse what you say.
thank you. That I think that really is helpful. I think that, because it's just this weird, it's a weird experience. So
yeah, well, this is, I mean,
stockpiling is weird.
This comes up for me a lot with, like, other people who are genderqueer, trans. A lot of people in that community online just will have nothing to do with people like Blair White and now Lacey Green. And I worry that when I go talk to those people, I'm kind of breaking the picket line and am, at risk of being the cool one who goes and talks to them. So I feel like I often have to reiterate, and I do often have to reiterate, to be responsible, that no one has an obligation to go on a live stream and defend their gender identity, and that if I choose to do it, it's because I happen to be in a psychological state where I feel up for it, and because I hope that I can do some good by it. But at no means do I suggest that everyone has to do that, and I don't even suggest that I'm in any way superior for choosing to do it.
And I think it's worth pointing out, and I'm really glad we had this exchange. I think it was very useful and helpful, and also I think for people who are going to watch it, your position and how you feel, you're on the record again on it. Yeah, now I forgot what I was going to say. So are we okay to then, sorry, anyone else want to come in on that? Or are we okay to move on? We've got two more questions.
I just want to say, I hope I didn't put you on the spot too much. Like, I did think it was a useful, because it came up, I thought it was a useful thing to bring up, but I don't want to put you on the spot, because I also...
No, I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, cool.
Aw, everyone here is so lovely. Good. Then the next question is, this one has some of the sort of obfuscatory language that perhaps some people were complaining about, so I had to rehearse it a couple times to make sure I got the pronunciation of everything right.
Oh, I look forward to this. Okay, go.
From Ben. I'm curious about the views, if any, each of you hold on the rise in prominence of neo-reactionary accelerationism and the demagogues who peddle it within the broader online right.
Okay, I'm going to need a translation, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, neo-reactionary accelerationism. Anyone else want to have a go at that one?
So, sorry, what was the first few words of the question?
Sure. I think what they're talking about, the rise in prominence of neo-reactionary accelerationism.
What we think about it? Or?
Yeah, sorry, you're curious about our views on it. I think it's the rise of the alt-right.
I assume the alt-right is what we're talking about here, along with their enablers.
Yes, and the demagogues.
Yeah.
So we're translate that into, we're deciphering it. It's like reading Butler. No, just joking.
What do you think about the rise of the alt-right online and the right-wing demagogues who support them?
Right. Translation complete.
I mean, my entire YouTube channel is about this, basically.
Yeah. I'm not best pleased.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there is, I'll just throw something out there and then I'll toss it over to Kristi just because I got there first. In my lifetime, I have been aware of racist groups, and I lived in a northern state where we had people in the John Birch Society, but I heard about them on the radio and the news. I didn't really know any of them personally. But what, to me, the online access and interactions have shown is either there are way more people than I ever realized, or there's an emboldening of neo-Nazis and alt-right thinking, fascist thinking, dictatorial thinking, people who want to throw away democracy in favor of an ideological goal, than I remember ever in my lifetime. And it's not just happening in the States. You know, we're seeing it with the rise of dictatorships in Turkey. We're seeing it with, you know, what's going on in Venezuela. This is part of a global sort of pattern that we're facing in Russia with their corrupt, basically a mob rule there. We're seeing this rise kind of as, again, echoing almost 100 years ago with the rise of fascism, but it doesn't look the same because it's 100 years later, but the same kinds of adherence to strongman principle leaders and authoritarian ideologies. To me, it just feels almost deafening compared to what I remember even 10 years ago. So, anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah,
Yeah, Chris.
I never expected to see this sort of thing again. Like, not like this, not so blatant, so racist. Like, I'm a little bit obsessed with Richard Spencer, to be honest, because he fascinates me, and his rise and the things that he's doing fascinate me. He's not a good person. He's disgusting, but it just, you know, and I've mentioned this before, he's got the haircut and the clothes like from Zach Morris at Saved by the Bell, and he comes out in this very sort of like latte, and he's educated, he went to Duke, and he knows what he's talking about. And then every now and then you see how dark he is and how twisted he is deep down, but he hides it so well and so glibly, and so, you know, just keeps. And so there, and then he knows how to keep moving the words around, right? You know, well, today we're going to be identitarians, and then we're going to be nationalists, and then we're going to be this, and, you know, so it's really about catching on to the strategies that the smart ones use, I think, is important. Because there's plenty of really incredibly stupid people in the alt-right. But I don't.
There are some bright people as well.
There are some really smart ones too, and they're convincing people. I have a friend who is fairly educated, reasonable, smart, and he's getting caught up in all this race realist crap. And I'm not an expert on it. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to leverage it. Like, I'm like, he's gone, isn't he? He's gone to me. He's just gone away.
Yeah. And Spencer's, although we tried to play it down, well, both play down and play up sort of the role of YouTubers, etc., Spencer has certainly said that he owes a debt of gratitude to some YouTubers, large YouTubers out there, in terms of leading them down a certain, being the sort of entry level point for certain other ideologies. So
yeah, for me, I mean, I was aware of the kinds of rhetoric that's very commonplace today. Way back, 10 years ago when I was a teenager, I had this kind of morbid curiosity for reading like Stormfront. I had no sympathy for it whatsoever, but just like to see like, oh my gosh, look at these neo-Nazis. Isn't that an oddity? So I was aware of Jared Taylor and race realism and these people, but and in retrospect, the fact that this all seemed like an interesting joke seems just like the delusion born of utter privilege, which it was. But when a couple of years ago, I started seeing these, like, because I had once been a YouTube atheist, these people were just recommended to me in my YouTube subscription box. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it looks like the Stormfront homepage is now the YouTube homepage. And I was like, I was so stupid. A year and a half ago, I thought I was like, all right, I should make a YouTube channel, and if I can just show them, I'll show. And I some of my early videos are like this. Like my video is Trump racist, which is now a historical curiosity. Like I go through and I show like the similarity between things Trump says and like things like that are typical like white nationalist rhetoric. And then the way people responded to those early videos, I realized, oh, everyone's becoming a white nationalist. Like they're not gonna, like it's not that they're not gonna see the comparison to white nationalism and be immediately repulsed and be like, oh gosh, how could I be taken up by this? They're gonna be like, yeah, we know. Like they actually think these things. And so yeah, it's been scary to see what was once just really fringe, just like white Aryan resistance movement and Stormfront and this kind of stuff, suddenly like being sort of given airtime on YouTube on major channels that claim to be discussing politics from centrist position.
Yeah.
All right, so this is then the last question, and it's for Moriarty, so we can always and it goes like
Why
this.
are you such a cock?
Yes. This is from Lance. I don't know if you talked about this before, Professor, but what is your interpretation of the shitlord events out at VidCon? Have you kept up with the VidCon stuff at all?
Yeah, I know what he's talking about. Yeah, it's interesting. This is what I was talking about. This idea that there's a collegiate. There's a clique there that got together that was very highly coordinated. I believe one of them said that this was one of the greatest things they did in their life when they piled in 3 rows deep to sit in an audience. If that's the pinnacle of your success and your achievements, then maybe you need to take a long, hard look at what you're doing. The certain YouTube, I'm going to try and avoid names here, in particular currency out of this, is doing in a very cunning way, and his the argument that is that what he's trying to do is to show up inconsistencies in terms of how he was treated and how others have been treated. I don't have a huge amount of time for that argument because it's, again, as Contra was saying, you can't take just one event in isolation. You have to consider the whole track record and troll history. I think that what Hank Green did was bang on the money in terms of how he approached it. And there's a hypocrisy here, which again, and I'm going to mention this particular YouTube because I've mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention him unbelievably, given the extent to which he slacked me off in the past. Mason was dead right. There's an hypocrisy here, and there is a massive hypocrisy in terms of how that event is being used from supposedly people who claim freedom of speech, who claim the usual talking points, etc. It's a massive level of hypocrisy. So yeah, I've followed it from afar. There was a good article written, and I can't remember, a guy called Colin Campbell, who sort of went through the history of the entire thing. So I don't have a lot of time for the arguments that are being made. I don't think it really sort of underpins the extent to which this isn't about principles. They really have reduced it to what they call a war, a culture war, etc. And it's not about, they'll claim that those on the left are, anti-free speech, etc. What's absolutely clear is that they use exactly the same tactics. So this idea that it's all about principle, freedom of speech, it's not. Everything they're doing is just about, sort of entrenching their position. And if they have to do that in a very unprincipled way, they'll do it. So that was a very waffly answer, but it's a very complicated sociological problem, I think.
Well, that brings us to the end of our questions and almost to 2.5 hours. So I think we all need a break. As lovely as this is, I could honestly keep going, but I feel like if I don't at least check in with everybody and offer an out, you guys will just start dropping off. So I know we haven't actually covered all the topics we were hoping to, which just means we'll have to do another hangout if people are up for that.
I do need to get going right now, but I'm definitely down to do this again anytime. Let me know.
Brilliant.
That
It was
sounds
fantastic, Contra. Thanks.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you all.
So what I'll do then is I'll close up the Hangout, and Philip and Chris, if you want to stay afterwards a little bit for a bit of a wrap-up chat. But for everybody who stuck around to our 130 viewers right now, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Now,
Thank
of course, if you've just joined, you should go back to the beginning because we're ending. So you kind of missed the best bits. But go and sub. Yeah, go sub Chrisiousiti's channel. What's your latest video?
My latest video was Twitter drama Sargon Nuff Said.
Right, go check that out. And Philip, we will of course, always find excuses to get you on the air. So we'll try to get you on again as soon as possible.
That's very kind
lovely to
and deeply masochistic of you. So thanks.
So to everybody in the chat and everybody who's watched all the way to the end of the video, I am Kristi. You've been awesome. My guests have been awesome. And I will be talking to you guys again very soon. Bye from all of us.
Bye.
Bye.